Know anything about a horse named Blown Up?
Nah, he ain't never done much. Probably in there just to round out the field. Chancing's where you want to have your money.
Great tip you handed me, kid.
Just give him time.
Nice work, Erie. He loves you.
He's third.
The classic movie The Sting gives us a good reminder that when it comes to investments, remember one word: plastics. Wait a minute, that was the wrong movie. When it comes to money, remember the following advice about what's important. And that is, it's important to have a reliable source. Of course, it's not always easy to tell whether a source is or isn't reliable, and that's especially true with so much information bombarding us today in this online age. But it is possible to improve your odds of finding good intelligence and to decrease your odds of getting stung. You'll find out how on today's show. Yes, once again, it's time to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. Let's get started. Get ready to separate reality from myth.
With us, David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
But David Scranton says, hey, not so fast.
How does it affect the markets? How does it affect the economy? Thanks to efficiencies and new technology and a staff of veteran analysts and portfolio managers, Sound Income Strategy strives to set new standards and bring institutional-style investing to your portfolio. Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, your host. Last year, we did a show all about media bias, and we demonstrated how the financial media isn't immune to this problem. In fact, far from it. Most of the information that comes to you through the media, be it network TV or the internet, is probably biased to some degree or another. Just being aware of that is a good first step toward protecting yourself from potentially harmful advice and information. But there are other steps that you can take and sources that you can access to help make sure that you're getting good intel when it comes to your finances. And joining us to talk about this today, and as well as other important issues, is Tobin Smith, author of the forthcoming book, Fear and Unbalance: Confessions of a Fox News Hitman. And later on, we'll also be welcoming Kara Murphy of AIG Retirement. But first, let's review some things about the financial media and why bias is a natural byproduct of our system. In our show all about media bias last year, we pointed out that the explosion of the internet in the last 15 years has only made this problem much worse. Liberal bias in the mainstream media was already an issue, but rather than solve it, the rise of the internet, along with cable and satellite TV, simply spawned even more bias than ever before. It also made things more confusing for everyday investors who are trying to get good, reliable intelligence. When we talk about bias, we're talking about information that is in some way self-serving. It has a hidden agenda, which, not surprisingly, is usually profit-based. When it comes to the financial media specifically, this can be particularly problematic. Many Americans base their savings and investment decisions on news and information that they get through financial programs, magazines, blogs, and websites. If that source has an ulterior motive that puts the needs of the network author or blogger ahead of your needs, then the question becomes exactly how trustworthy can it really be? As I've explained in some of my books, bias in the financial media isn't always malicious. It's just how the system works, plain and simple. It starts with the reality that a Wall Street CEO's primary fiduciary responsibility is to his shareholders, not his investors or customers. That one simple fact creates a trickle-down effect. It makes it almost necessary for much of the financial media to put the goals and needs of their advertisers ahead of those of their customers. And let's face it, most of these programs, magazines, and websites get most of their revenue from advertisers today, not subscribers. Knowing that, it only makes sense that they would want to keep these advertisers happy. And that's fine, except when the goal of pleasing advertisers runs counter to serving the needs of viewers and readers. So for example, Let's say that celebrity expert that you see on television who's yelling that the sky-high stock market is the only game in town and that you'd be a fool not to ring, every bell and every last penny out of it. You have to ask yourself, is that advice really being given for my benefit, or is it being given for the benefit of the station's advertisers and their CEOs? Remember, that CEO's first responsibility is to shareholders. And how does he please those shareholders? The primary way is by keeping as many customers as possible invested in the company stock at all times. Get the picture? Again, it's simply how the system works. Another important point to keep in mind is that a lot of the so-called experts providing information in the media really and truly aren't actually experts at all. In print, for example, a lot of articles are written not by financial professionals, but by general assignment reporters. A reporter who, for example, might be someone who writes a piece for Sports Illustrated on Monday and then an article for a financial magazine on Wednesday. And who is he likely to interview to get the information for this financial story? Well, in many cases, there's a really good chance that it'll be a financial firm that, yes, advertises in that very same publication. Meaning the story may be slanted to please that advertiser and that advertiser's CEO. Again, get the picture? And as for those smooth-talking experts on television, let's face it, some actually have no financial credentials at all. They're really more like actors or professional celebrities. And this creates what's known as authority bias, where you tend to be inclined subconsciously to trust someone just because he or she looks good, speaks well, and therefore you assume that that person knows what he or she is talking about. The bottom line is that it's important to approach media-based advice and information with some degree of healthy skepticism. It's also important to keep in mind that media experts can really only speak in generalities. Let's face it, every individual's financial situation is different. And because of that, there is really no such thing as a one-size-fits-all piece of financial advice. This is one of the main things that makes successful planning such a challenge for do-it-yourself investors. Now, none of this means that you can't potentially find helpful or valuable information through the financial media. But it does mean that it's probably not smart to make any major financial moves or decisions purely on that basis. It's important to dig deeper, to look further, and to discuss the information with a qualified, objective financial advisor who can help you apply it to your individual situation. Think of it this way. If a so-called medical expert on television told you it was a good idea for every person over the age of 50 to eat a whole bag of walnuts every single day, you probably wouldn't do it without running it by your doctor first, right? I mean, after all, that would be kind of sort of nutty and possibly very dangerous for the health of many people. Well, it's a similar situation when it comes to the intel that you get about saving and investing on television, in the print, as well as on the internet. Make sure that the information you're receiving is really right from you and that it passes what I call the sniff test. While a qualified financial advisor can certainly help you distinguish good intel from potentially harmful information, you can improve your own skills at this as well. And we'll talk about that a bit later on the show. But right now, I'd like to welcome our first guest, author, entrepreneur, and former Fox News analyst, Tobin Smith. Tobin has been with us on the show before. He's the founder of ChangeWave Incorporated and InvestorPlace.com. He's also the author of several books and a former financial commentator for Fox News. Toby, welcome back.
David, good to see you, lad.
Of course, I love it when you call me lad. That's perfect. It makes me feel young again. I like that.
Exactly.
It's funny, we're talking, of course, as you know, about bias in the financial media today. And, your new book that's coming out really talks about that in a very specific way. Fear and Unbalanced, Confessions of a Fox News Hitman. So is the president right then? Is there a lot of fake news out there? Is it all over the place?
Well, my book specifically is on, what I did and what I was involved in at Fox News. I assume that a lot of your viewers, are Fox News fans and watch, et cetera. And I would guarantee you, David, that if you ask them, do you realize that almost every opinion program that I ever participated in, about 2,000 of them, by the way, was specifically scripted and rigged by the producers, by Fox News producers, so that I, the conservative person, would win the argument. And they did it in a number of ways, starting with, did you ever notice that the liberal opponent of mine on Fox News was always a third or fourth string person? I mean, if you were a Democratic strategist, which basically meant you were an attractive male or female, but even better, attractive female, we put you on Fox. And then we gave you a subject like me. I run an investment research company, a hedge fund, a mutual fund, a macroeconomic research guy. And they would bring up a subject that was exactly what I do for a living, and that poor, liberal person had no idea other than what the Democratic talking point was. But that was great, because if they brought up the Democratic talking point, we would hit our first mark of our performance art show, which was we wanted to get that person to stand up, David, and feel like they wanted to throw a brick through the television. That was exactly what people told me for years, that, viewers would say, oh man, I just wanted to throw a brick. Well, if we got your blood going, and that liberal opponent put out these apostasies and heretical remarks against conservative ideology, and then I swooped in at the end and I said, listen, sweetheart, that's great. Let the big boy take it over here now. First off, you don't know this. Second, you don't know this. Number three, and I hit a couple of conservative ideological points. Boom. The reader at home, the viewer at home says, yeah, but Toby, you killed that libtard. They get on Jack. I mean, they literally get a shot, not of adrenaline, but of dopamine, the really good stuff, the good chemical that makes you feel great. And this segment is over.
So
Go to
basically,
commercial, and we have you two minutes back. Yeah.
So basically, they can't officially rig it because they never know what the liberal opponent, so to speak, is actually going to say.
Oh,
but
that's wrong.
But I guess if you take an all-star pitcher and you put him up against a double-A batter, chances are you stack the deck sufficiently, that batter is going to strike out.
Right,
and you're that all-star pitcher.
Right, but David, that you have that wrong. We got every talk show, you get what's known as the point of view, the talking points, right? And they get emailed and back by all the combatants. The difference is I was live in Fox. A lot of times, the other conservative people were off like me. They're off on Skype or out on a satellite. I was in studio and I was in the production offices, and at 4 o'clock when everything was all tied up, then I would get my final instructions. I would get the final point. I would see what the final point of view from my opponent was. And then the producers would give me these script that basically say, here's how you kill him. Here's what I want you to hit. Also, remember that Roger Ailes, God bless him, was the one who gave out the talking points for the shows. Every day, the executive producer would get, we call it the RTBs, Roger Talking Points, RTPs. And that's what our television show was about. And that was because Roger had his finger right on the pulse of the conservative, small-town, rural viewer who was our core audience. So if we took what we know was going to tick them off.
So Toby, we need to take a quick commercial break. I want to hear a lot more, but stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute, okay? And for Income Generation members, you stay with us also. We'll be right back with more from Toby Smith. So exactly how then do you improve your ability to distinguish good intel from bad when so much of it is bombarding you on a daily basis? A good first step is to improve your own personal financial literacy. According to a study recently by FINRA Investor Education Foundation, an estimated 2/3 of Americans today cannot pass a basic financial literacy test. What that means, unfortunately, is that 2/3 of Americans don't really know or understand the various investment options available to them or how each of them differs from the other. They don't fully understand the concept of financial defense or the strategies involved. They know little about the stock market, how it works, or the bond market, or how it works, or how market changes can impact their own investments. They don't really understand the relationship between the economy and the financial markets, or why it's so incredibly important when it comes to making financial decisions, especially after the age of 50. While all of this is unfortunate, it's also understandable. Traditionally, the public education system has mostly neglected these important topics and continues to do so today. They may get some coverage in a basic economics class, perhaps, but that's often not even a requirement for every student. The Center for Financial Literacy at Champlain College recently graded public school systems throughout the country on the teaching of financial literacy. And on their most recent report card, 22% of states received a failing grade. Less than half of all U.S. states received above a C. Nor do most businesses provide financial literacy training for their employees, even though it would probably be in their best interest to have financially literate workers. Now, yes, in some cases, large companies do pay for personal financial planning services and financial training, but typically only for their top managers, not for most employees. Not having that basic understanding of finance does indeed put you at an enormous disadvantage when it comes to distinguishing good financial intel from bad. And by the same token, being financially literate helps you to process information from an educated and informed perspective. Think of it this way. Who's less likely to be victimized by a shady used car salesman? Someone who's never looked under the hood of the car, or someone who took 2 years of auto shop in high school and still changes his own oil? Obviously, it's the latter, not the former. He's able to listen to the salesman from an informed perspective and has a better filter for distinguishing good, accurate information from biased information. And of course, most used car salesmen are likely to be biased to some degree because they have a self-serving motive also, and that is to sell the car and to get their commission. But if schools and businesses aren't providing financial literacy training, then where are you able to get it? Well, yes, there are a number of books that can be helpful, but another option is to keep an eye on your local newspapers, websites, and social media for information about workshops and adult education programs. There are, in fact, many financial professionals who offer financial literacy training for free as a public service. Now, that may sound too good to be true, but I know from experience that most good advisors consider themselves educators first, and they're always eager to teach. It also makes good business sense because a financially literate public is good for the local economy in general. In fact, I feel so strongly about this that a few years ago I started my own nonprofit organization, the Scranton Academy for Financial Education. The goal of SAFE is to make it easier for Americans of all ages to access free financial literacy classes and programs in their communities. I'll talk more about ways to improve your financial literacy in just a bit. But right now, I'd like to welcome back to the show Tobin Smith. So Toby, you were telling us about how the deck got stacked because you'd always get the notes, the talking points from the liberal opponent, as you said, and then the brain power would get together and give you the best solid argument. So you kind of knew what your argument was going to be, but they didn't. You knew what both arguments are going to be, but they didn't.
Yeah, but even more than that, you know, in talk show world, you call they call it the ball game. The ball game is, are you going to have two people who go at it, right?
Right.
The other side of that was that not only was the ball game rigged, but many times they would tell me what they wanted me to say. Because I mean, for instance, you know, I mean, you're a bond guy, right? I was a bond guy for a long time. What people on Fox, if Roger said, look at the price of eggs and meat is up, so let's talk about inflation, I would say, well, the reason why we take meat and eggs and gasoline out of inflation because that goes up and down. And the director would say, a producer would say, I don't know if you get this, Toby, but here's what you're going to say. You're going to say, yeah, you're dead. I'll tell you, this inflation, the government is lying about inflation numbers. They're lying about it. And I would to myself say, after a while, okay, you know, you pay me $5 or $10 grand a week to do this. Okay.
To do it.
I didn't know that anybody listened to this stuff. Honestly, I didn't. I thought people understood, just like the WWE. Remember back in '94, the FCC came and said you had to disclose that all your matches were rigged.
World Wrestling.
Like no one didn't know that.
Well,
I thought that people at home would, understood this.
So with that thought in mind, Leslie, as you get the talking points, the notes in advance, I typically don't bother to look at those, but whenever I get, a big-time, nationally known guest like yourself, I always read those talking points. And I want to ask you about one of those that's quite interesting here. A claim that in part because of alienation that some people go through from being so radically conservative. That recent studies show that the premature death rate of some of those individuals can be 45 or 50% higher.
Yep.
So in essence, you contributed to the deaths of a lot of Americans. How is this possible? Help us to understand this.
It's absolutely true. And I didn't really, first off, when I left Fox, there was a movie that came out called The Brainwashing of My Dad. And it was an 80-minute documentary that went through what happens to someone when they go off the cliff. Remember, when you go off the cliff at Fox News, that means you're over 68 years old. Their median average age is 68, which means half of the people are older. When you start watching 2 to 4 hours, that's the average that Nielsen says.
That's a lot.
What I would call the Fox News addict is. Then what happens is you become desocialized. And many times, I've done studies across the United States that 1 out of 5 people know of someone who's become so hyper-radicalized that their family doesn't want to spend any time with them. Their friends, they become ostracized. When you become ostracized, when you're 68 plus years old, you become chronically lonely. And now we have 3 recent research deals that says the number one way you become chronically lonely is pushing away your friends and your family. And one of the top ways you do that is when you become that angry, always pissed off, always outraged person that frankly just no one wants to be around. I mean, so we've connected the dots. We're doing more research on this, but this is BYU, this is San Francisco State, this is the UK. The chronic loneliness kills more people in the United States over 60 years old than obesity. Certainly more than addiction to opioids, et cetera. It is an absolute epidemic, and
it can't help it happens to older folks perhaps more easily than any others if you think about it.
Of course, because number one, you're already basically lonely. Your lifestyle's different. A lot of times they're retired. You're isolated. If you move to Florida and your family still lives up in New England, you're not seeing them as much. I mean, that all gets going there. But once you sort of become this person that's always angry, that uses the N-word when they never used the N-word before, and uses all the terminology. Your kids up in the East Coast probably went to a better school than you did, blah, blah, blah. And they come home and all they hear is this anger and this vitriol, and liberals are killing this country, and Obama was born in Kenya, and they're just, it's just a natural thing. When you sort of say, hey, I'll see you in about 5 more Thanksgiving.
Well, I'm not 68, but I have to tell you how I solved that problem. It was really easy. I simply fired all my liberal friends. That's it. I got rid of them. So now I don't have to worry about that. I alienated myself. But at least I try to be unbiased here on Newsmax the best I can. But
right,
Toby,
but
thanks so much for being here with us today. I need to leave it there for now, but hope to have you back. And again, thank you, Toby. And stay with us. We'll be right back. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation. We'll see you all next Sunday.
And hello, I'm John Bachman. This is your Newsmax Finance Update. Let's take a look at some of the stories that moved the market this week. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says the U.S. is not trying to start a trade war with China. Instead, he says the U.S. is just trying to level the global playing field. His remarks come one day after President Trump announced steep import tariffs on washing machines and solar panels. China and South Korea have condemned those tariffs. The dollar hit a 3-year low against the U.S. bond prices as they eased on Wednesday. This after Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin confirmed that he welcomed a weakness in the currency. Fears of protectionism from the U.S. economy had already pushed the dollar down, but Mnuchin's remarks at the Davos World Economic Forum pushed it down even further. And Ford Motor Cars is complaining about the rising cost of metal cutting into its profits. The car manufacturer presented its earnings estimates for 2017 and 2018. It says the higher cost of aluminum, steel, and other metals, plus currency volatility, could cost it more than $1.5 billion this year alone. Aluminum prices have risen 20% over the last year and jumped nearly 11% since just the middle of last month. For more on these stories, you can check out newsmax.com/finance. Now back to David Scranton in The Income Generation.
Tell our viewers in your own words why financial literacy is so important to you.
Well, as you pointed out, finance is an important component of all goals, almost all goals in our life. And so the key thing to kind of question is whether we really have the financial understanding that we think we do.
Now, if you watched our show on goal setting recently, then you know I believe that setting goals is one of the absolute most important first steps in successful financial planning. After all, if you don't know exactly where you're going, then how do you expect to get there? Well, improving your ability to distinguish good financial intel from bad and to access information that's right for you specifically is, yes, another important step. And again, a great way to get there is by improving your own financial literacy. But recent data shows that most Americans of all ages still have plenty of room for improvement. A 2017 survey by the company Financial Engines found that even though nearly half of Americans say they feel more secure about their money than they did 5 years ago, still only 6% could pass an 11-question financial literacy quiz. So, while people might believe they're making responsible financial decisions, it seems that their lack of basic knowledge could be making them vulnerable to bad intelligence and setting them up for disaster. So now, let's have some fun together. Let's see if you can correctly answer the 4 questions on the survey that tripped up quiz takers the most. Number 1, how much will the typical married couple retiring at age 65 spend in today's dollars for out-of-pocket medical costs throughout retirement? Is it A, $50,000, B, $100,000, C, $157,000, D, $200,000, E, $266,000, or F, $330,000? The answer is E, $266,000. Question number 2, if you purchase a bond and interest rates rise, what will happen to the price of the bond? Will it A, rise, B, stay the same, or C, fall? Surprisingly, less than 20% of quiz takers gave the correct answer, which is C. The bond price will fall if interest rates rise. Next question. A typical 65-year-old man can expect to live on average for how many more years? Is it A, about 10, B, about 15, C, about 20, D, about 25, or E, about 30? The answer is C, about 20 more years, although many Americans today are living up to 30 years or more in retirement. And finally, what is the average annual rate of inflation for college tuition around the country? Is it A, 2%, B, 5%, C, 8%, D, 11%? Well, the answer is also C, 8%. So, how'd you do? Even if you aced all 4 questions, keep in mind the more you learn, the better off you'll be. That's because you'll be better equipped to sort through the morass of information and advice coming your way every single day to distinguish good intel from bad, and to work with your financial advisor to create the right plan for you. Joining me now to talk more about finding good financial intelligence and the importance of financial literacy is Kara Murphy, Chief Investment Officer of Sun America, a subsidiary of AIG. Kara, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about finding good information and how people can tell when recommendations are biased and not biased. But gosh, before we get into that, I've got to ask you, one CFA to another, what's going on with these financial markets? Is this stock market, is it making sense to you? Are we getting in the realm of irrational exuberance? What's your take on this?
So it's been a fascinating time. And 2017 was a record year for records. We had the S&P, the NASDAQ, the Nikkei, all making a record number of new highs. You had the S&P that was up every single month of the calendar year. That's never happened before. And then the Dow, which is, typically a more sleepy index, actually outperformed all of the other U.S. major indexes. So 2017 was a fantastic year. And then here we are, not even finished with January, and we have the S&P 500 up 6%. So it's really been an extraordinary time. But, despite the fact that valuations feel lofty, that we're getting a little long in the tooth, there's a lot of economic underpinnings for the enthusiasm that we're seeing in the market.
But is this, the enthusiasm's there, granted, but it seems to me like the gains we had last year, at least a good chunk of those, weren't really backed up by economics and fundamentals. That maybe over the last few months that's been the case. So are we getting into this blow-off period in the market here, do you think? Or do you think we have maybe a solid 2018 ahead of us in the stock market?
Well, so when we look at things like business confidence, earnings, all at pretty lofty levels and actually getting better. We're seeing earnings being revised up. We also see pretty strong consumer confidence, and that's really mirrored by the strength that we're seeing in the labor market. When we look at manufacturing activity, that's actually quite strong. And a lot of these numbers are being mirrored. It's not just in the U.S., but they're being mirrored in non-U.S. markets. So there has been increasing momentum in the economy. And then, of course, more recently, we have the tax reform package, which has just put another, shot of adrenaline into the arms of the markets.
Okay. So you think then there's a good chance 2018 could continue its momentum potentially?
I do. And, a lot of the reasons to be cautious in the market are somewhat lofty valuations. And I agree, valuations are definitely above average. Another reason is that we've just been in an upcycle for a really long time. But typically when we look at timing indicators for the market, those aren't great signals for when to sell the market. So the types of things that we look for when to sell the market are things like an inverted yield curve or leading economic indicators starting to turn down. And we're not seeing those type of signals right now.
Of course, the Federal Reserve is trying their darndest to create an inverted yield curve, so who knows, they might get their way. So now I know you manage really the mutual fund side of division of your company. So are you starting to see now shifts where there's more outflows from bond funds, inflows into stock funds? Are you starting to see that sign at all? Because historically, from my experience, that has been telling of getting near to the top of a market cycle.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We were actually just discussing this very issue yesterday in our weekly meeting because we've been waiting this whole cycle to see flows coming back into mutual funds and ETFs. And while we've seen a lot of shifts from mutual funds to ETFs, we haven't seen those shift to equity funds, just in general. Most of the flows that we've seen coming into the market have really been going into fixed income. So I feel like this time around, that signal may not work the way that it has in other cycles. So no, we haven't seen people necessarily changing behavior in terms of switching between asset classes, but that hasn't really functioned like you might expect in this cycle at all. We do see higher levels of cash on balance sheets. Okay. So for instance, private equity funds alone have $1 trillion of dry powder sitting on their balance sheets right now.
Yeah, that is a lot, absolutely. Are you seeing that also a lot of cash in money markets that you manage, or higher than historical, or not really?
We have not seen big shifts in money markets. Again, that's another indicator that we might look to see, growing caution in the market. And we have not seen major changes in the money market funds. Interesting.
Yeah, I wonder, you probably don't have an answer. I wonder how much of that is because a lot of what, of course, your company does as an insurance company is put protection around a lot of these mutual funds in the form of an annuity wrapper. So I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute to ask you a lot more about today's markets. And you stay with us also. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm your host, David Scranton. Becoming financially educated or financially literate doesn't necessarily begin or end with finding and taking a course specifically on financial literacy. There are many issues and topics that incorporate or touch upon basic elements of said financial literacy. In other words, you can improve your own financial literacy by learning more about any number of related topics. For example, a workshop or course on the stock market or the bond market is likely to arm you with a lot of valuable information. You might come away with a better understanding of things like how the financial markets really work, what terms like bull and bear market really mean, the important differences between bonds and bond funds, and how everyday investors like you and me differ from majority shareholders like, let's say, Warren Buffett. All of that improves your financial literacy. Similarly, If you are part of the income generation, classes or workshops on topics such as tax savings, estate planning, or depending upon your age, maybe Social Security, Medicare, or required minimum distributions can be extremely beneficial. Not only can they provide you with information you need to make important decisions in the short term, but they can greatly improve your financial literacy in the long run. So keep an eye out for classes or workshops in your own town or neighborhood. Now it's time to welcome back Kara Murphy, Chief Investment Officer of Sun America, to discuss financial literacy and your takes on all of this. So Kara, obviously Sun America has its own products that advisors offer but are not required to offer. They can offer your proprietary products, they can offer some other ones. How do you and your company help ensure that what they're saying is unbiased and that any information that's coming out in terms of advertising is unbiased? I know I'm putting you on the spot. This isn't your area. You're a chief investment officer. You're a CFA money manager like me. But how does your company do that?
Well, we spend a lot of time making sure that we have the right message about our products, right? So we have to make sure that we understand what goes into our portfolios, what we're holding, and more importantly, sometimes the process by which we get there. So we spend a lot of time talking about process. We talk with a lot of advisors about the way that we construct our portfolios, our systematic approach, how we view different factors, and how that all feeds into the end result of the holdings that we actually have in there. So it's very important to us to make sure that we get the message correct. And that's what we're really going for when we talk to advisors.
So what you're basically doing is you're educating them so that they could better educate their clients and help the clients make informed decisions.
Absolutely. And again, it's not just about the individual holdings that are in the portfolio, it's the process and how we get there, and to make sure that we do that on a consistent basis.
Now, I know we talked about, just a minute ago before the break, I talked about the fact that a lot of the business that they do as an insurance company consists of variable annuities, which for our viewers, if you're not aware, are basically sub-accounts, kind of sort of like mutual funds wrapped in an insurance wrapper. Tell me, is there any difference in how you invest behind the scenes the money for a sub-account and a variable annuity, given that they have that insurance wrapper, compared to maybe a more equivalent mutual fund? Or does it not really matter?
It depends. So we spend a lot of time talking with the folks at each of those channels to make sure that we understand, what type of risk that they're looking for in the portfolio. So that discussion really comes in the construction part as we're developing the product and determining what the investment strategy is going to be. Now, there are times when the same strategy will work in the mutual fund world and in the VA world, but there are other times when they're looking for something different. So it's really a matter of an individual discussion for each of the channels that we work with.
When you talk to advisors, if you had to say in general, what is the one area where advisors might need a little bit more education? What would that area be?
So one of the most interesting topics that's been coming up recently, where I feel like advisors are maybe a little bit behind the curve in learning about, is environmental, social, and government investing. So this is, it's a relative, well, I should say it's been around for a long time, but it's been getting a lot more press recently. And when we look at surveys, we find that investors are very interested in these types of strategies. Asset managers are increasingly beginning to offer these types of products, but it's really the advisor who's kind of in between these two areas, who's not yet very comfortable with the types of products that are offered. They don't yet understand that you don't have to give up return in order to have something that's ESG focused.
Of course.
So they're not really talking about it. So a lot of the work that we do is getting them educated in what's out there.
And in the 20 seconds we have left, if you can just tell us what your opinion is of where the average investor needs the most education today.
The average investor needs to make sure that whatever their plan is, they stick with. That is the most important thing.
So create a plan, work your plan, stick with your plan. Good advice. Very good advice. Absolutely. Too many people make emotional decisions, and that's why, as you know, a lot of investors end up buying high, selling low by accident. So, Kara, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was wonderful having you.
Thank you. Take care.
Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle, 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Discover practical solutions to the financial challenges facing today's generation of retirees and near retirees. Learn the truth about Wall Street, the financial media, and the secrets they try to hide from everyday investors. This isn't just another book about investing. Working Americans who have lived through 2 major stock market crashes and the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression in the past 16 years don't need another book about investing. David Scranton's approach to financial planning is a holistic system designed for maximum protection, strategic growth, and reliable income regardless of market conditions. Stop planning for retirement with your fingers crossed. Read Return on Principle, 7 core values to help protect your money in good times and bad. Available now.
You're watching Max to Money.
We never know when interest rates will shoot up, but they can't stay near record lows forever. So if you're investing in bonds, now is a good time to start thinking about playing defense and making changes to your financial future.
Well, we all hear now is a great time to buy a home because interest rates are so low. But we all know that at some point down the road in the future, we don't know when interest rates are going to rise. Interest rates and bonds have an inverse relationship. As interest rates go up, the value of the bond goes down. So the reason you really want to look at the bonds in your portfolio right now is to understand how you're positioned for a rising interest rate environment.
If retirement is around the corner, be careful with your bond selection. Understand what individual bonds you own, as well as bond mutual funds. Then talk with your financial advisor to figure out the best strategy for you and your family. I'm Hannah Ostapchuk.
Get more money news at Newsmax.com.
If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation. We'll see you all next Sunday. This is fun. This is great. 3, 2, 1. But I'd like to take a few seconds and tell you why I decided to write the book entitled Return on Principle. Basically, it all boils down to this. Let's face it, you deserve to live a happy retirement. It's as simple as that. But for many, the subject of money, finance, and math is complicated. Here's a fun fact. Many Americans claim that they'd much rather clean a toilet than calculate a tip in a restaurant. Thank you, I guess. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. Using the 7 core values I outline in my book, you too will be able to build a life based upon the right core principles. Cut. Return on Principle isn't just a book about financial investing, it's about investing in your life. I know for a fact that you're going to love it. Okay, now it's just getting a little weird here. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining us for another episode of The Income Generation. I'd also like to thank you, our new and returning viewers. There's no question that we live in challenging times. The so-called information age has indeed evolved into an age so filled with information sources and various outlets that it's harder than ever before to know what's accurate, what's reliable, and what's truthful. But that same reality makes it more important than ever to sort it all out. No one should ever make a major financial decision based on information that is simply convenient or just seems credible. A general would never commit his troops to battle without making sure he had good intel first. And gathering good intel takes diligence and education. The same is true when it comes to distinguishing good intel from bad in our financial world. It starts with improving your own financial literacy. And it shouldn't conclude by working in partnership with a qualified, objective financial advisor who understands your individual goals and challenges. Thanks for watching. If you're close to retirement and you really want to know how to protect and maximize your money, it's absolutely essential that you stay informed and up to date. And right here is where you can do it on The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton. Thanks again. I'll see you next week. If you're not using someone who's well trained in fixed income and you're born before 1966, it may just be time for you to break up with that advisor and move on. I would suggest someone who will care for you through these important years of your life. If you need help finding someone, call or write us. I'd also like to remind you of the special report entitled The Income Generation. This is available free to you, our loyal viewers, online. If you haven't downloaded your report, pick it up after the show. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation. We'll see you all next Sunday.